Good morning, fifth grade. We are reading our final two chapters of Who Was Christopher Columbus. I will get started with chapter 8, A Third Try. The return trip was rough. There were strong winds and high seas. The trip took 4 months, longer than expected. Supplies ran short. When Columbus reached Cadiz in July 1496, he and his men looked as though they had been through a war. They were hungry and tired. Their clothes hung on their bodies like rags. Columbus defended himself before King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. He told them he had brought back some treasure. This was true. And he said that he had explored 700 islands. This was an exaggeration. The king and queen were not happy. Columbus had failed. He had not brought back what he had promised. Members of the court called him Admiral of the Mosquitoes. Columbus's sons, Diego and Ferdinand, were there. They served as pages to the king and queen. They had to watch as their father was disgraced. Yet 2 years later, the king and queen agreed to send Columbus on another voyage. Why did they do this? An explorer from Portugal, Vasco da Gama, had actually reached the Indies. He had sailed down the west coast of Africa, around the tip of the continent, and on to India. He brought back many riches. The rulers of Spain did not want Portugal getting all the treasure, so they decided to take another chance. Maybe Columbus, on this next voyage sailing west, would strike it rich. Finally, 46-year-old Columbus began his fourth voyage from southern Spain on May 30th, 1498. He had just 6 ships. Sure, it was a larger fleet than his first voyage, but once again, his crew was made up of many criminals. Why? Because people had heard of Columbus's failures. No one wanted to sail with him. The ships sailed southwest to the Canary Islands. There they split into 2 groups. 3 ships went to Hispaniola to deliver supplies. The other 3, under Columbus's command, went off exploring. Once again, Columbus ran into trouble. There was no wind, so they just floated. The sun was hot, so the men's skin blistered. Their food began to rot, and their water barrels burst in the blazing heat. The heat lasted for 8 days. Then the winds picked up and the land was spotted. Columbus must have been overjoyed. He named this island Trinidad after the Holy Trinity. Just across from this island lay what could have been Columbus's biggest discovery, the coastline of South America. The land looked like a continent, but how could that be? Columbus was still sure that he had already found the Indies. Columbus reasoned that what he saw now must be the earthly paradise or the Garden of Eden. He had no time to explore this paradise, though. He wanted to get back to Hispaniola. There's a map of his journeys. And we have an insert about Vasco da Gama. When Vasco da Gama decided to try reaching the Indies by sailing around Africa, many people thought he was crazy. They did not think that the Atlantic Ocean connected with the Indian Ocean. Bartholomew Diaz had sailed to the tip of Africa, but not around it. On July 8, 1497, da Gama set sail from Lisbon and proved that the oceans did indeed connect. He guided his ship around Africa's Cape of Good Hope on November 2nd, 1497. After making stops in Africa, Vasco da Gama reached Calicut, India on May 20th, 1498. He traded goods with the people of India. On the return trip, many of his crew members died from scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C. Nonetheless, upon arrival in Portugal, Vasco da Gama was greeted as a hero. Arriving in Santo Domingo, a colony his brothers had established, Columbus was greeted by another nasty surprise. Bartholomew and Diego were no longer in command. There was no food, people were sick, some had rebelled. Columbus tried to maintain order. He had no better luck than his brothers. That August, the king and queen sent someone to see exactly what was going on. He reported back. The rumors were true. Things were a mess. Many men were sick. Others, once who had rebelled, were dead or in jail. Columbus and his brothers were arrested. Shackles were slapped around their wrists and ankles. They were thrown in jail. Christopher Columbus, admiral of the ocean sea, was sent back to Spain in chains. Chapter 9, One Last Try. In Spain, Columbus landed in jail. There he stayed for 6 weeks. When his chains were taken off, he kept them. He told one of his sons that he wanted to be buried with them. Most men would not have had the nerve to ask the king and queen for more money for yet another voyage. But Christopher Columbus was not most men. He refused to give up. The king and queen knew that Vasco da Gama was off on another voyage. He might come back with all sorts of treasure. Why should Portugal get all the glory? So when Columbus went to Ferdinand and Isabel asking to be sent on a 4th voyage, believe it or not, they said yes. This time, though, they only provided 4 old ships and 135 men, including Columbus's 13-year-old son, Ferdinand. And there were rules: no slaves, no stopping off at Hispaniola. Columbus didn't mind about the rules. All he cared about was going to sea again. On May 9th, 1502, Columbus and his 4 rickety ships set off. At first, everything was perfect. The sky was clear, the sun was shining, the stars twinkled at night, and a steady wind moved the ships along. But then the clouds rolled in, the wind picked up, Columbus sniffed the heavy air. A hurricane was on its way. The only sensible thing to do was seek shelter on the nearest island. That was Hispaniola. But Columbus had been forbidden to set foot there. The new governor refused to let him come ashore. Columbus was outraged. This was the place he had settled. Yet he and his men were forced to stay on their ships and wait out the storm. Columbus next set sail for Jamaica, only to be hit by more storms. One lasted for 88 days. At last, Columbus's ships limped to land, what is modern-day Nicaragua, where they stopped for repairs. Then finally, north of what is now Panama, Columbus found gold. At long last, he started another settlement. At first, the natives were friendly. They traded, and the 2 groups lived alongside each other in peace, but not for long. In the spring, 400 natives appeared carrying bows and arrows. A battle began that lasted for 3 hours. In the end, 7 Spaniards and 10 natives lay dead. At the time, Columbus was sick with a high fever, so he was alone on one of the ships. Hearing the battle, he climbed up the mast to the highest point of the ship and cried out. There was no reply. Tired and sobbing, Columbus soon heard a voice telling him not to be afraid. Everything was going to be okay. Gathering up his strength, Columbus collected his men and abandoned the settlement. He left with a couple ships that were in such terrible shape they were practically in pieces. They anchored off the coast of Jamaica, and that was where they stayed for the next year. Columbus and his men were stranded. At least the natives seemed friendly. Each day they brought Columbus and his men food to eat and water to drink. But Columbus did not trust them. What if the natives stopped bringing food? Or worse, what if they attacked? This time there were no ships to escape on. Columbus convinced 2 of his men, Diego Mendez and Bartholomew Fieschi, to take canoe and paddle to Hispaniola. There they could buy a ship and come back to rescue them. At first, Mendez thought this was an impossible plan, but he took the risk anyway. Columbus kissed Mendez on both his cheeks and bid him and Fieschi a safe journey. A few days after they left, Columbus's fears about the natives proved true. They refused to bring any more supplies, so Columbus decided to trick the natives into doing what he wanted. Knowing that there would soon be a lunar eclipse, Columbus told them God was very angry with them. It was wrong to stop bringing food and water. God was so angry, in fact, that he was going to hide the moon. When the eclipse appeared that night and the moon did indeed hide, the natives were scared. They promised to keep bringing food, and they did until the day the rescue ship arrived. On June 29, 1504, a very old ship sailed to the coast of Jamaica. Christopher Columbus was almost 52 years old. Now his eyesight was failing, and he was in poor health and constant pain. Still, he was happy to be rescued. He was anxious to get home and see the Queen. But he never set his eyes on Queen Isabella again. 3 weeks after his arrival in Spain, the Queen died. It was November 26, 1504. Columbus had lost his biggest supporter. Columbus was old and sick. His days as an explorer were over. On May 20th, 1506, Christopher Columbus died. He died believing that he had found a sea route to the Indies, but he had not. So if he didn't reach the Indies, then why is he so famous? Columbus found new lands, the Caribbean islands, Jamaica, and Cuba, places that no other European had ever been to. Because of Columbus, there was now a passageway between Europe and the Americas, one that other explorers could follow. Christopher Columbus did not find gold. Instead, he found a whole new world. That is the end. I hope you enjoyed Who Was Christopher Columbus?